What if Antarctica, the coldest and most desolate place on Earth, is not simply a frozen wasteland, but a vault of memory? Picture it, a continent locked under more than a mile of ice, silent and unyielding, seemingly untouched by the hand of time. To us, it feels like the very definition of emptiness, a place where nothing human could thrive, where even survival is an act of endurance. Yet tonight, we ask a different kind of question. What if this emptiness is not the beginning of Antarctica's story, but its ending? What if beneath that impenetrable white shield lies the hushed echo of a civilization now forgotten, its presence erased, its history entombed, waiting for discovery? Civilization, as we normally think of it, is tethered to warmth, rivers, fertile plains, and long-growing seasons. We rarely imagine cities rising at the ends of the earth. And yet, the world has a way of hiding its deepest surprises where we least expect them. Beneath Antarctica's frozen mantle lies bedrock that once stood in a completely different world, when the continent was lush, forested, and temperate. This alone reshapes our assumptions. A land that today can barely sustain penguins and lichens once bore ferns, reptiles, and trees whose rings still rest in the fossil record. If life could thrive there in the distant past, could people too have once found a foothold? The notion feels audacious, almost impossible. Yet history is a careful teacher. How many times have civilizations risen, only to fall and vanish into silence? The Stone Age cultures of Europe, the lost kingdoms of the Amazon, even once mighty cities like Çatalhöyük or Mohenjo-Daro, all remind us that forgetting is easier than remembering. And Antarctica, with its crushing ice sheets, is the most forgetful continent of all. Its glaciers act as erasers, grinding down mountains, carrying rocks for hundreds of miles, burying entire valleys under rivers of frozen time. If a people ever did rise there, whether 1,000 years ago or 1,000,000, their memory would be concealed in the planet's deepest freezer. To raise this question is not to make a claim. It is an invitation to imagine, to stand at the edge of the known and wonder how many pages of Earth's story are missing from the manuscript. For Earth itself is a palimpsest, a parchment scraped clean and rewritten again and again by ice, fire, and shifting seas. If we mistake blankness for absence, we risk ignoring what has simply been erased. So we begin here, with a question not of certainty but of possibility. Imagine standing on the Antarctic plateau at night, the wind screaming like a cathedral organ across endless white. Above, the stars blaze with indifference. Beneath your boots, 2 miles of ice extend downward into shadow. At the very bottom lies a continent older than memory, its rocks crushed, its rivers vanished, its forests fossilized. What stories might those rocks tell, if only we knew how to listen? Rock, after all, is the memory of Earth, recording pressures, climates, and even traces of fire and life from millions of years ago. And ice, for all its silence, is memory too. Within it are bubbles of ancient air, grains of volcanic ash, faint isotopes from cosmic storms. Together, rock and ice form a library vast beyond comprehension, but one written in a language we are only beginning to decipher. Could those pages contain hints? Not proof, not monuments, but hints that others once walked this land before the ice came. Could a chemical fingerprint in an ice core or a strange isotope in the rock whisper of fires, tools, or even a people? The answer may never be clear-cut. Evidence is fragile, and time is merciless. But science itself begins in such whispers. Faint anomalies, strange signals, little departures from what we expect. Sometimes they resolve into nothing more than natural quirks. Other times, they open doors into worlds we never imagined. This, then, is the icebound question. Antarctica confronts us with both silence and possibility. If civilization once touched this land, its memory is not carved in pyramids or inscribed in scrolls. It would be written instead in subtler languages. Chemistry, isotopes, extinction patterns, signatures far more enduring than stone. Whether we will ever learn to read them fully remains uncertain. Yet perhaps the greater value lies not in the answer, but in the humility of asking. So tonight, we walk slowly into the frozen unknown, step by step, section by section, through science, myth, and imagination. We do not chase spectacle, nor claim revelation. Instead, we hold a quiet space for wonder, asking together, what if Antarctica is more than ice? What if beneath its frozen mantle lies a story not yet ready to be told? When most of us picture Antarctica, we imagine a barren desert of white, an endless expanse of snow where only penguins, seals, and the occasional scientific outpost break the silence. But this image is a recent one, geologically speaking. The Antarctica we know today is not the Antarctica that has always been. The continent has shifted its identity many times, each transformation carved across millions of years. To grasp the mystery of what may lie beneath, we first need to remember that this frozen land was once something very different. Drift back in time, 100 million years ago. Antarctica was not a polar wilderness then, but part of a warm and fertile supercontinent. Lush forests covered its valleys, rivers meandered through wide plains, and dinosaurs left footprints in soils now hidden far beneath the ice. Fossilized leaves, stumps, and pollen grains, still occasionally unearthed by researchers, bear silent witness to this vanished era. Imagine walking under a canopy of southern beech trees while dragonflies skimmed ponds and massive reptiles lumbered past. In that world, Antarctica was not hostile. It was alive. Even later, as the dinosaurs vanished and mammals rose, Antarctica remained surprisingly hospitable. During the Eocene epoch, around 40 million years ago, the continent supported forests of ferns and conifers. It was home to turtles, marsupials, and crocodile-like creatures basking on riverbanks. Geological cores drilled from beneath the ice reveal traces of these ancient ecosystems. The cold had not yet seized the land. Instead, Antarctica was more like a green refuge at the bottom of the globe. But the Earth is never still. Tectonic plates shifted, ocean currents changed, and Antarctica began its slow march toward isolation. By around 34 million years ago, the continent was cut off from the warmth of neighboring lands. The Antarctic circumpolar current formed, encircling the landmass with cold water and sealing its fate. Ice spread across the land, at first seasonally, then permanently. What had once been temperate forests hardened into permafrost. Valleys became glaciers. Rivers froze. The green world was locked away, and with it, the memories of what had once flourished there. This transformation reminds us of a central truth. Continents are not fixed, and their climates are not eternal. The Earth reimagines itself across time, sculpting and erasing, writing and rewriting, and so we must pause and consider. If entire forests, rivers, and ecosystems could vanish beneath ice, how much easier would it be for the traces of people, tools, or even cultures to disappear as well? The fossilized forests we find are precious only because chance preserved them. What of the things that left no fossils, no bones, no easy markers? For scientists, The story of Antarctica is reconstructed like fragments of a dream. Fossilized wood tells us it was once green. Pollen trapped in sediments reveals the shifting of ancient climates, and rocks whisper of tectonic upheavals that pulled the land southward into its icy prison. But for every piece we uncover, countless others remain erased. Nature's eraser works slowly but thoroughly, grinding stone, scattering soil, and burying landscapes beneath miles of frozen silence. And here is where the possibility grows. If a continent could hold forests and rivers, it could hold people, or beings that lived in ways now unimaginable. Perhaps not skyscrapers or steel, but communities, rituals, stories. Civilization does not always mean pyramids or marble columns. Sometimes it means modest villages, tools of bone and wood, myths carried on the breath of generations. If such a presence existed in Antarctica before the ice advanced, the likelihood of its traces surviving is small, but not impossible. The ice itself might be the great preserver, hiding clues as carefully as it hides fossil leaves and pollen. Antarctica is a paradox, a continent that reveals by concealing. To know it is to accept both its silence and its memory. When we speak of it as forgotten, what we really mean is that it has forgotten us, that its glaciers have wiped clean the pages we wish to read. Yet just as ancient forests have been coaxed from the ice, perhaps more remains. The question is not only what was lost, but what might still be waiting to be found. As we step deeper into this exploration, remember that Antarctica is not static. It has been green, it has been frozen, and it may one day be green again. Its identity is not a single photograph of endless white, but a shifting film across eons, and within that film, hidden between frames, may be stories we have not yet imagined. If Antarctica once wore a different face, lush, green, and alive, then we are led to the core question of our journey. If a civilization ever rose upon that land, how would we ever know? What traces could possibly endure beneath 2 miles of unrelenting ice? This question does not demand an answer of certainty. It asks instead for patience, humility, and imagination. Civilizations leave behind many forms of evidence, from towering monuments to fragile strands of DNA. Yet each of these is vulnerable to time. The ice that covers Antarctica is not a gentle blanket. It is a grinding machine. Glaciers carve valleys into bedrock. They drag boulders for miles, and they crush anything in their path into dust finer than sand. If cities once stood here, if temples rose or villages clustered by rivers, the relentless movement of ice would have swept them clean. A cathedral buried beneath a glacier would not remain a cathedral for long. It would become rubble, then sediment, then nothing. So how would we know? What clues might escape this vast erasure? The answer lies in subtlety. We cannot expect intact ruins. We cannot expect scrolls, inscriptions, or even bones. Instead, the signals that endure are the quiet ones, the fingerprints left not in architecture, but in chemistry, geology, and biology. The story of a forgotten civilization, if it exists, would not announce itself with dramatic clarity. It would appear instead as faint anomalies, whispers hidden within ice cores or mineral seams. Imagine, for example, drilling deep into Antarctic ice and finding a sudden spike in carbon isotopes. To most, it might seem like a natural climate fluctuation. But what if the pattern matched the burning of vast forests, not the rhythm of volcanoes? That could suggest a controlled fire, a clearing of land, or even agriculture. Or imagine encountering in the oldest sediments a fragment of plastiglomerate, stone fused with plastic-like polymers, something no natural process could explain. In such traces, a civilization might reveal itself, not with grandeur, but with chemistry. The core mystery, then, is a paradox. The very processes that erase civilization's visible signs may also preserve its hidden signals. Ice may grind buildings into dust, but in doing so, it locks atmospheric gases into bubbles. It seals volcanic ash into annual layers. It freezes chemical residues in place. Rock, too, remembers. It records heat, pressure, and mineral change in ways that last across millions of years. The record is subtle, but it is not silent. Yet interpretation is the challenge. How do we distinguish between what is natural and what is artificial? How do we avoid mistaking a volcanic eruption for a signal of industry, or a meteorite strike for the work of mining? The danger of imagination is that it can overreach, reading intention into accident. That is why the question is more valuable than any answer. It teaches us to look closely, to search for patterns, to accept that ambiguity is part of deep history. The mystery of Antarctica's hidden past is not whether a civilization definitely existed, but whether the signals of such a presence could survive at all. To ask this is to confront the scale of geological time. 1,000 years might erase our cities. 10,000 would bury our roads. 100,000 would grind our ruins into sediment. And yet, some faint signals might endure. A thin line of isotopes, an unusual concentration of metals, a fossilized microbe changed by human hands. So we stand at the threshold of the question. If a civilization once lived beneath Antarctica's ice, we will not find it in marble or in myths carved on stone walls. We will find it, if at all, in the smallest of traces, subtle signals that require us to listen with instruments more sensitive than our eyes, and imaginations more cautious than our desires. The continent challenges us with silence, but silence itself can be meaningful. Sometimes, the absence of evidence is not the end of inquiry, but the beginning. The real question is not only how we would know, but whether we would even recognize the signs if they lay before us. There is a saying among geologists: rock is the memory of Earth. Unlike paper, which burns, or digital files, which vanish with the flicker of electricity, rock remembers. It keeps the long diary of the planet written in layers, folds, and fractures. When we gaze at cliffs, at mountain strata, at the polished cross-section of a core sample, we are looking into the memoir of Earth itself. Each band, each mineral grain, each fossil impression is a word, a sentence, a paragraph in a text that has taken billions of years to write. Antarctica is no exception. Beneath its frozen crown lies a geological library, silent but vast. The rocks there have known warmth and verdancy. They have known fire, flood, and extinction. They have drifted across latitudes, collided with continents, and carried the scars of these collisions in their structure. Even now, under more than a mile of ice, these rocks remember. They are not empty. They hold the story of everything that has touched them: forests, rivers, animals, and perhaps even something more. But memory is never perfect. Just as a manuscript can be scraped and overwritten, rocks, too, are subject to revision. Volcanoes remelt the script, earthquakes fold it, glaciers grind it to dust. The words of Earth's memory are durable, but they are not invulnerable. In Antarctica, the ice plays both roles, eraser and archivist. It obliterates the grand structures of the past, yet preserves minute traces with extraordinary fidelity. A collapsed building may be erased, but the ash it left in the atmosphere could settle into the ice and stay locked there for millions of years. Consider how scientists study deep ice cores from Antarctica today. By drilling slender cylinders through the frozen layers, they retrieve samples of ancient atmosphere, tiny bubbles of air trapped like beads in glass. These bubbles tell us of climates long gone, how much carbon dioxide filled the air, how much methane, even how the winds once shifted. In a sense, the ice is a librarian of air, preserving the breath of ages. Rock, meanwhile, is the librarian of fire and pressure, holding the record of tectonic upheavals, of buried forests, of vanished ecosystems. Together, ice and rock offer two halves of a dialogue, one etched in water, the other in stone. If there had been a civilization in Antarctica, its grandest structures would likely be gone. But its influence, its fires, its industry, its transformations of the land, might still echo in this dual archive. Perhaps in a strange isotope signature sealed in an ice layer. Perhaps in a concentration of metals in bedrock that speaks not of volcanic eruption, but of extraction. Perhaps even in a fossilized forest where the growth rings show sudden, unnatural patterns of stress, as if cleared or cultivated. These are not monuments of stone, but whispers in memory. And yet memory can deceive. Not every anomaly speaks of people. Not every pattern implies design. Volcanoes can scatter ash across continents, leaving chemical spikes that resemble industrial pollution. Meteorite impacts can deposit exotic metals in sudden bursts. Glaciers can rearrange boulders in patterns that look strangely deliberate. This is the paradox of deep memory. It remembers faithfully, but without commentary. The rock and the ice record what happened, but they do not explain it. Interpretation is left to us, and our interpretations, like all human stories, are shaped by hope, caution, and imagination. Still, to see rock as memory is to adopt a new kind of humility. We recognize that Earth itself carries the archive of all who have walked upon it, whether known or forgotten. To read these archives is to engage with time on its deepest scales. It is to realize that our own presence, too, will one day be a faint chemical whisper, a thin layer of plastic residue, a scattering of isotopes in the grand volume of Earth's book. So when we ask what Antarctica remembers, we are asking more than a speculative question about lost civilizations. We are asking how memory itself survives, not in scrolls or libraries, but in stone and ice. The continent may have forgotten the visible, but in its deeper pages, perhaps something remains. A faint entry in the planetary diary, a trace that hints of a story older than our own. To walk across Antarctica today is to walk atop that library, the largest and least read in the world. Every gust of wind, every shifting crevasse, every silent snowfall conceals the archives further, and yet, within, they persist. Antarctica is not empty. It is full of memory, written in languages we are still learning to read. When we look at Antarctica today, it seems unimaginable that anything but ice could dominate this landscape. Yet the rocks beneath tell another story, one of warmth, of flowing rivers, and of forests that once stretched across the southernmost land on Earth. These were not just small groves clinging to sheltered valleys, but vast ecosystems, comparable to the great temperate forests of modern Europe or North America. Fossilized stumps, leaves, and pollen grains, extracted from layers buried deep below the ice, reveal a world that feels almost impossible to reconcile with the barren continent we know. Scientists have found the remains of beech trees, ferns, and conifers, They have even discovered fossilized wood that still carries visible growth rings, evidence that trees once endured the seasonal cycle of light and darkness at high latitudes. These forests stood tall millions of years ago, during times when Antarctica was positioned differently on the globe and the climate was far warmer. Picture standing in that ancient world. Instead of blizzards and endless ice sheets, you would hear the buzz of insects, the croak of amphibians, perhaps even the splash of reptiles moving through marshes. Rivers carried silt through valleys, shaping fertile plains where plants grew thick and abundant. This was a land alive with color and sound, utterly unlike the stillness of today. It was, in every sense, habitable. During the mid-Cretaceous, around 90 million years ago, Antarctica's climate was subtropical. Palms and flowering plants grew here, nourished by high global temperatures and elevated carbon dioxide levels. Later, during the Eocene epoch, roughly 40 million years ago, the continent still supported dense rainforests. Fossils of marsupials, amphibians, and reptiles suggest that the ecosystems were as complex as those found in Australia or South America during the same period. Even more astonishing are recent findings of preserved soil layers beneath the ice. In 2019, a team of researchers drilling in West Antarctica uncovered sediments that held pollen, spores, and even root systems, direct evidence of a rainforest environment some 90 million years old. The soil showed signs of warmth and abundant rainfall, proving beyond doubt that Antarctica was once far from the frozen desert we see today. What does this mean for our question of forgotten civilizations? It tells us that Antarctica was not always inhospitable. There were windows in deep time when the land could sustain not just forests, but potentially human-like presence, if such beings existed at the time. While mainstream science places humanity's rise far more recently, the fact remains. Antarctica's landscape has cycled through phases where survival was entirely possible. To dismiss it as always frozen is to ignore the vast and shifting canvas of geological history. These forests, now petrified and buried, are Antarctica's most eloquent testimony that change is the only constant. They remind us that what we see today is not permanent. The continent has been green before. It could be green again, should the climate shift dramatically in the future. And in those shifts, entire ecosystems, and perhaps the traces of civilizations, can be hidden or erased. There is a strange poignancy in this knowledge. The fossilized trees are ghosts of a living world, caught between transformation and erasure. They whisper that Antarctica's silence is not eternal. It is a pause, a moment in a longer story. The forests beneath the ice are memory made visible, proof that continents can forget and remember themselves across time. If we imagine people, or something like people, once moving through these forests, their traces would be fragile compared to the resilience of stone and pollen. Wood rots, bone breaks, tools decay. But the environment that could have supported them is undeniable. The possibility is not proven fact, but it is no longer unthinkable. And sometimes, to ask what if is the beginning of deeper discovery. So the forests beneath the ice become more than curiosities of paleobotany. They become part of the riddle, a reminder that Antarctica has not always been a land of exile, but a place of abundance. And if it was once abundant, what else might it have sheltered before the ice drew its curtain? The forests of Antarctica tell us that the continent was once alive, green, and habitable. But the story does not end with their flourishing. Just as surely as they grew, they also disappeared, consumed by ice and by the shifting of the Earth itself. If we are to imagine the possibility of a civilization in this far southern land, we must also imagine how easily its traces could vanish. Antarctica is not only a place of transformation, it is a place of erasure. Glaciers are relentless. They move slowly, almost invisibly, but their patience gives them strength. As they advance, they scour mountains down to their roots, grinding rock into fine powder called glacial flour. Valleys are widened into broad U-shapes, ridges are carved away, and any structures in their path are destroyed utterly. If a city once stood in the path of a glacier, it would not remain a ruin, it would be unmade. Buildings would collapse, then be ground into rubble, then into sand, and finally into dust, scattered across the seafloor by meltwater. The record of human presence would be erased, almost as though it had never been. Tectonic drift adds another layer of forgetting. Antarctica has not always occupied the bottom of the world. Over hundreds of millions of years, it has migrated across latitudes, colliding and separating from other landmasses, and bearing the marks of those collisions in its rocks. Continents are not static, they are restless. They shift like pieces on a board, changing the context of everything upon them. Any memory of civilization tied to a specific geography becomes scrambled when the land itself moves beneath our feet. And then there is erosion. Even in the absence of ice, time wears everything down. Wind and water soften edges, bury artifacts in sediments, and dissolve what once was hard into soil. If we measure history not in centuries but in millions of years, the survival of anything recognizable becomes astonishingly unlikely. To find a pot, a tool, or a bone intact after such spans of time is the exception, not the rule. Imagine for a moment a modern Antarctic research station built with steel, concrete, and plastics. If abandoned, how long would it last? Within a century, storms would tear at its walls. Within a few thousand years, advancing glaciers would crush it. Within 10,000 years, it would be unrecognizable. Within 100,000, nothing would remain but faint chemical signals, perhaps a spike of unusual metals or isotopes in the ice. And if the land shifted again, those too might vanish. Now extend that imagination further back, to millions of years. Could any trace of human-like presence endure such a span? The odds are slender, yet not impossible. Earth itself keeps some memories against all odds. The shadow of a leaf in stone, the imprint of a raindrop preserved in shale, the faint residue of ancient atmospheres locked in crystal lattices. What is erased on one scale may survive on another. The trick is knowing where and how to look. This, then, is the heart of the problem. Antarctica's timeline is not just ancient, but interrupted, overwritten again and again. Forests gave way to ice, ice ground valleys into plains, plains submerged under shifting seas. Each layer covered the last, and in doing so, hid or destroyed what came before. It is not only that we lack evidence of civilization there, it is that the continent itself conspires to bury any such evidence beyond reach. And yet, silence is not certainty. The absence of visible ruins is not proof that nothing once stood. Antarctica's timeline is a palimpsest, scraped clean and rewritten so many times that most of its earlier chapters are illegible. But sometimes, faint words still show through. Fossil forests, trapped air bubbles, chemical residues. These are the margins of the text where traces linger. If civilizations ever touched this continent, their signatures would be faint, but perhaps not gone entirely. So when we say a timeline erased, We must also acknowledge the paradox. Erasure is never complete. Like ink rubbed from parchment, some letters remain. The task is to learn how to see them. It is easy to look at Antarctica today, a continent smothered under 2 miles of ice, empty of visible ruins, and conclude with confidence. Nothing has ever been here before. But this conclusion rests on an assumption, one that does not hold up well against the patience of geological time. The absence of evidence is not the same as the evidence of absence. And nowhere is this more true than on the world's most efficient eraser of memory, Antarctica. Let us begin with a thought experiment. Imagine one of Antarctica's modern research stations, built of steel, aluminum, and plastic, braced against katabatic winds, lit through the long polar night. Now imagine it abandoned. No crews to maintain it. No supply drops to reinforce its walls. Just the station alone against the cold. Within decades, snow would begin to bury its structures. Within centuries, glaciers would overtake it, pressing the walls inward, breaking glass, bending steel beams. By the time 10,000 years passed, not even a ruin would remain. The station would be compacted into rubble, mixed with ice, and carried slowly toward the ocean. When it reached the sea, meltwater would scatter its fragments across the seafloor. What had once been a thriving human outpost would become invisible. And yet, invisibility is not the same as non-existence. Even if the walls, the computers, the furniture, and the bones were gone, some traces might still persist. A small chemical signal, an unusual concentration of lead or copper, a spike of artificial isotopes, or a fragment of plastiglomerate fused into the sediment, would remain as a faint whisper. Not proof in the sense of monuments or inscriptions, but a clue. A subtle, measurable hint that something unnatural once passed through. This is the difference between ruins and residues. Ruins are bold. They speak loudly, declaring themselves to anyone who stumbles across them. Residues, on the other hand, are quiet. They demand patience, instruments, and interpretation. They can be missed, or mistaken, or doubted. But they are no less real for being faint. When we think about lost civilizations, we often imagine them as monumental. Pyramids standing tall, stone heads staring across centuries, temples buried in jungles but still recognizable as human work. In Antarctica, this expectation misleads us. No monument could survive the slow violence of glaciers. If civilizations ever existed there, their survival would depend not on stone, but on signal. We would need to search for their presence not in architecture, but in chemistry and geology. This is why absence cannot be equated with nothingness. Imagine again that Antarctic station vanished after 10,000 years. Would a visitor then assume no humans had ever been there? Most likely. And yet, if they drilled an ice core, if they measured the isotopes, if they noticed the faint anomalies, they might pause. Something here does not fit the natural rhythm. Something, perhaps, once intervened. The lesson is one of humility. Our default assumption, that nothing exists unless we can see it with our own eyes, does not hold up across deep time. The earth hides as much as it reveals. Forests once stretched across the continent, now petrified and buried. Rivers once flowed, where now only ice remains. If entire ecosystems can vanish so completely, why not entire cultures? To hold this perspective is not to claim certainty. It is not to say that a civilization must have existed beneath Antarctica's ice. Rather, it is to admit that erasure is powerful, and that our human scale of evidence is short-sighted. 10,000 years may seem long to us, but it is the blink of an eye to glaciers. A million years is less than a chapter in the Book of Rock. Civilizations, if they came and went, could vanish many times over without leaving monuments behind. So when we gaze upon Antarctica and see nothing but ice, the wiser response is not to say, nothing was ever here. The wiser response is to say, if something was here, its traces would be faint. The question is not whether evidence exists, but whether we are looking in the right way, at the right scale, with the right patience. Absence, then, is an invitation to imagine, to search for subtle signals, and to acknowledge how much can be hidden in plain sight. Antarctica's silence is not a denial. It is a challenge. If stone is the memory of Earth, then chemistry is the ink in which that memory is written. Not all traces of the past take the form of fossils or ruins. Some are invisible to the naked eye, yet enduring in the language of atoms and molecules. In the silence of Antarctica, where glaciers erase visible monuments, it is chemistry that may hold the clearest echoes of what once was. One of the most revealing signals is found in carbon isotopes. Carbon exists in several forms, or isotopes, most commonly carbon-12 and carbon-13. Plants, animals, and industrial processes leave behind distinct ratios of these isotopes in the atmosphere. By studying ice cores, scientists can measure ancient carbon levels with extraordinary precision. These frozen bubbles of air, some over 800,000 years old, preserve the record of past atmospheres as though they were tiny time capsules. Now imagine drilling into Antarctica's ice and discovering a sudden shift in those ratios, a pattern that does not match natural cycles of volcanoes or forest fires. Such an anomaly could suggest something different, perhaps widespread burning of vegetation or even industrial activity. For us, the Industrial Revolution has left a clear mark in the atmosphere, visible in just a few hundred years of ice layers. If another civilization had altered its environment on a large scale, its signal might still be hidden, waiting to be detected. Another chemical clue lies in plastics. These synthetic polymers are durable, and when fused with natural materials, they form plastiglomerates, rock-like composites that may endure for millions of years. Today, bits of plastic are already entering sediments and becoming part of the geologic record. If an earlier technological species had also created polymers or similar materials, traces of them could persist, buried in sediments beneath the Antarctic ice. Imagine a single, pebble-sized fragment of plastiglomerate sealed away, a whisper from a vanished age of technology. Long-lived radioisotopes are another signature that could betray intelligent activity. Some isotopes, such as plutonium-244 or certain byproducts of nuclear reactions, do not occur naturally in significant amounts. If they were ever released into the environment by a civilization's technology, they could persist for tens of millions of years. They would act as unmistakable fingerprints of artificial activity, signs that, at some point, someone had learned to harness the atom. But the beauty and the difficulty of chemistry is that it does not provide easy narratives. A spike in carbon isotopes might mean industry, but it might also mean massive wildfires triggered by volcanic eruptions. Plastics are unmistakable in our time, but in another age, natural resins or mineral composites might produce similar signals. Radioisotopes might point to technology, or they might come from a meteorite impact that scattered rare elements across the land. Chemistry gives us signals, but not certainty. It provides the alphabet, but not the story. Still, signals endure long after stone has crumbled. Consider how quickly buildings can vanish compared to the persistence of a chemical trace. A temple may fall within centuries, but an isotope can endure for millions of years. A bone may decay in soil, but a spike in methane locked in ice will remain. In Antarctica, where glaciers grind every visible thing into dust, chemistry may be the only memory strong enough to last. So if a civilization once walked beneath these skies, perhaps its clearest echo is not in ruins or artifacts, but in the subtle patterns written in air, ice, and stone. Patterns that do not fit the rhythms of volcanoes or the slow pulse of natural climate. Patterns that suggest intervention, intentional or accidental, by hands long gone. To search for these signals is to accept humility. The evidence may be ambiguous, the interpretations uncertain. But in the silence of Antarctica, chemistry whispers where stone and ice remain mute. And sometimes, the faintest whisper can be the most enduring memory of all. If you wanted to leave behind an unmistakable marker of our presence on Earth, one that would persist long after our cities had collapsed and our monuments eroded, you would not choose marble or bronze or steel. You would choose plastic. This humble, everyday material, so common that it clutters our oceans and our landfills, is in fact one of the most durable legacies of the Anthropocene. And if another civilization ever walked Antarctica long before us, something like plastic may be the very clue that would whisper of their existence. Plastics are synthetic polymers, long chains of molecules engineered for resilience. They do not rot like wood, nor rust like iron. Instead, they fracture into smaller and smaller pieces, scattering across soils and seas. Already, microplastics are embedded in ice layers across Antarctica, carried by wind and water to the most remote corners of the globe. But plastics are not only pollution. Under the right conditions, they become part of the geologic record. When plastic debris encounters heat, whether from campfires, volcanic activity, or even lightning strikes, it can fuse with sand, rock, and organic material to form plastiglomerates. These strange composites resemble ordinary stones, but inside them are fragments of bottles, nets, or melted resin. Once buried in sediments, plastiglomerates behave like rock. They can endure for thousands, even millions of years, resistant to erosion and decay. In the far future, geologists will find them as clear signals of our presence, artificial stones born of human invention. Now imagine discovering such a fragment deep beneath Antarctic ice, not from our own time, but sealed in sediments millions of years old. A pebble that contains within it the unmistakable structure of a polymer, something that nature alone could never create. For scientists, such a find would be startling, an artifact without a craftsman, a voice without a speaker. It would raise questions we are scarcely prepared to ask. The beauty of plastiglomerates is that they outlast the fragile. While wood, cloth, and bone vanish, these stones endure. They are modest monuments, not grand in scale, but profound in implication. They carry within them the story of technology, the moment when living beings learned to manipulate molecules, to create substances unknown to nature. Unlike pyramids or temples, they do not need to be maintained. They persist simply because chemistry favors their endurance. Yet even here, caution is necessary. Could there be natural processes that mimic plastiglomerates? In rare cases, organic resins like amber or volcanic glass might form similar composites. Distinguishing between what is artificial and what is natural requires careful analysis. A polymer's precise molecular structure, repeating in ways nature does not, would be the deciding clue. And so, in the silence of Antarctica, It is not the large and visible that might matter most, but the microscopic, the molecular, the chemical signature no glacier can erase. It is a humbling thought. If another civilization once lived here, we may not find their monuments or their bones, but we might find their waste, their equivalent of a broken fishing net, melted into sand and sealed into stone, could outlast every trace of their culture. The enduring story of intelligence may not be written in grand achievements, but in discarded materials that refuse to vanish. Antarctica reminds us of this irony. Beneath its white silence, there may rest not palaces or temples, but pebbles, small, humble, unassuming, yet filled with the unmistakable fingerprint of technology. If plastic is our most durable legacy, then perhaps the same was true of those who came before. Not all signals of civilization take the form of stone or plastic. Some are written in the invisible language of atoms, in isotopes that linger long after the structures that released them have crumbled. Among the most enduring of these are artificial radioisotopes, materials that, once created, remain as stubborn echoes of human activity for tens of thousands, even millions of years. Radioisotopes are unusual forms of elements, with different numbers of neutrons packed into their nuclei. Some are stable, but many decay over time, releasing radiation in a predictable rhythm. In nature, certain isotopes are rare but real, created by cosmic rays or by the fiery birth of the Earth itself. Yet others do not occur naturally in significant quantities. They exist only because intelligent beings have learned how to split the atom, how to manipulate the very heart of matter. In our own time, we have left behind such signals. The testing of nuclear weapons in the mid-20th century scattered isotopes across the globe. Even in the most remote ice of Antarctica, traces of plutonium and cesium tell the story of mushroom clouds thousands of miles away. These isotopes have half-lives long enough that they will remain detectable far into the future. A chemical scar of our brief technological age. Long after our cities fall silent, the isotopes will remain, whispering of fire harnessed at a scale larger than any volcano. Now imagine an archaeologist of the future, drilling into Antarctic ice and finding a layer rich in isotopes that nature could not easily produce. Perhaps not from our time, but from hundreds of thousands, or even millions of years ago. Such a discovery would be baffling. It would imply that at some distant moment, some intelligence had also learned to play with the atom, leaving behind fingerprints written in radiation. The ice would preserve their existence in silence, a frozen witness to a fire now long extinguished. This idea is not mere speculation for the sake of wonder. It reflects the real resilience of isotopes as markers. While metals may corrode and plastics fracture, isotopes decay with mathematical precision. Some vanish in decades, but others linger across spans of time that dwarf our species. Plutonium-244, for instance, has a half-life of 80 million years. If ever scattered by an ancient nuclear process, its traces might still be detectable today. Of course, natural processes can also create anomalies. Meteorite impacts can scatter exotic isotopes. Volcanic eruptions can produce unusual chemical signatures. Even cosmic rays can alter atoms in stone, and so, once again, ambiguity reigns. To read isotopes as artificial requires care, context, and skepticism. One must distinguish between the fingerprints of stars and the fingerprints of minds. Yet the possibility remains. Radiation is a voice that carries across ages. If another civilization once rose and fell upon this planet, perhaps its clearest legacy is not in monuments or myths, but in subtle signatures of nuclear fire. And Antarctica, with its ice cores and untouched sediments, is one of the best places on Earth to look for such echoes. In a way, this is the most humbling of all clues. Civilizations dream of building monuments to endure through time. Great walls, towering pyramids, shining spires. Yet the monuments most likely to survive are accidental, the stubborn molecules of plastics, or the isotopes released in a moment of power. The record we leave is not the one we intend, but the one the Earth chooses to keep. Perhaps beneath Antarctica's ice, there is such a record waiting. A thin band of radiation sealed in silence, the quietest but most enduring testimony that intelligence once touched this land. When human beings shape their world, they often begin with stone, but soon after, they turn to metal. Copper, tin, iron, and gold, each marks a threshold in our history, a step forward in technology and in complexity. And while wood and cloth decay, while bones dissolve, metals endure in the Earth's crust. They are durable, elemental, and stubbornly resistant to time. If ever a civilization rose in Antarctica, its story might be told not in ruins, but in seams of metal scattered through the rock. Mining leaves scars that nature seldom mimics. To dig deeply into the earth, to pull copper from veins or iron from ore, is to change the land in ways that last. Even if a mine collapses, even if glaciers grind the surface flat, unusual concentrations of certain metals can persist in the geologic record. A patch of rock unusually rich in rare earth elements, a seam of copper bearing signs of smelting, a concentration of lead or mercury that does not match volcanic activity. These would be faint but detectable clues, whispers of purposeful extraction. Already we can see parallels in our own world. The Bronze Age left behind slag heaps, piles of discarded rock fused by heat, that remain long after the tools they helped create have vanished. Ancient silver mines in Spain and Greece still betray the work of hands thousands of years gone. Even when all the structures have fallen, the chemistry of the soil tells the story of human industry. If future geologists were to analyze our age millions of years from now, they would likely find unusual patterns of metals in the crust, patterns that reflect mining, smelting, and manufacturing on a global scale. In Antarctica, such anomalies would be particularly striking. The continent is geologically active, with volcanic regions and mineral-rich mountains. But its remoteness and its ice mean that any unusual concentration of metals would demand careful explanation. Was it the result of volcanism, or of meteorites depositing exotic elements? Or could it be the residue of purposeful extraction, a mark left by hands that once shaped the land? Even beyond mining, metallurgy leaves signals. Smelting releases gases that alter atmospheric chemistry. Heavy metals seep into soils, sometimes creating toxic layers that persist for ages. If an Antarctic civilization ever learned to work metal, these residues might still be there, trapped in the ice or locked in layers of bedrock. The glaciers may grind and scatter, but they do not erase entirely. Traces remain, even when monuments do not. Of course, nature too has its way of confusing the record. Meteorites rich in nickel and iridium fall to Earth, leaving behind layers that could be mistaken for evidence of smelting. Volcanic eruptions scatter heavy metals across wide distances, mimicking the distribution of industry. Once again, the ambiguity remains. We must hold both possibilities, the natural and the artificial, side by side, weighing which better explains the evidence. But even in that ambiguity, there is meaning. If we ever find concentrations of metals in Antarctica that resist natural explanation, we would be faced with a choice: to assume accident or to allow the whisper of intent. That whisper might be faint, but in the silence of Antarctica, even faint voices carry weight. To imagine metals in the rocks of Antarctica as evidence of civilization is to confront a paradox. Our most advanced technologies may vanish, but the act of digging in the earth, of reshaping its chemistry, is nearly impossible to conceal completely. If the forests buried beneath the ice remind us of life once abundant, then seams of unusual metal might remind us of minds once at work, minds that, like ours, sought to pull hidden power from the stone. If chemistry and geology hold the fingerprints of forgotten civilizations, biology holds their shadows. Life itself becomes an archive, a recorder of changes that ripple outward from human or human-like presence. Plants, microbes, and animals all leave signals of the environments they inhabit. And when those environments shift suddenly, the cause is etched into their remains. Antarctica, though barren today, is layered with these biological records. Fossilized forests, pollen locked in sediments, and even microbial communities still living beneath the ice. Together, they form a kind of biological diary, one that may carry faint traces of past interference. Consider the fossilized forests buried beneath Antarctica's ice. Their growth rings are more than just beautiful patterns of wood. They are data. Each ring marks a year of life, recording conditions of sunlight, rainfall, and temperature. When stress occurs, whether from drought, fire, or sudden clearing, the rings change. They narrow, they distort, they sometimes bear scars of fire or disease. If ancient forests were ever deliberately managed, cleared, or burned, such traces might be visible in the wood. To a trained eye, the record of human presence could survive, not in ruins, but in the memory of trees. Pollen grains, too, are powerful witnesses. They are microscopic, yet astonishingly durable, persisting for millions of years. By studying sediments beneath Antarctica's ice, scientists have reconstructed entire ecosystems from pollen alone. A sudden disappearance of one species, replaced by another, might suggest climate change. But it could also suggest cultivation. Agriculture, after all, reshapes landscapes by favoring certain plants over others. If such a pattern were ever discovered in Antarctic sediments, it would be a profound anomaly, evidence that the biosphere had been altered by intention. Even microbes, invisible to the naked eye, keep records of their environment. In subglacial lakes beneath Antarctica, microbial life still thrives today, adapted to darkness, cold, and high pressure. These communities evolve in response to their surroundings, and if those surroundings shift suddenly, their genetic signatures can reveal the change. Imagine if deep beneath the ice, microbial DNA carried hints of a sudden influx of metals or of organic compounds not naturally present. Such clues would not prove civilization, but they would raise questions. Extinction patterns offer another lens. Across Earth's history, mass extinctions have reshaped the biosphere again and again. Some are linked to asteroid impacts, others to volcanic cataclysms. But what if an extinction pulse in Antarctica coincided with unusual chemical signals, or with abrupt changes in pollen records? Could it hint at more than natural catastrophe, at intervention, deliberate or accidental, by intelligent life? The record of extinction is written clearly in fossils, but the cause is always open to interpretation. And so we return to the paradox. Biology remembers, but it does not explain. A tree ring scar tells us there was a fire, but not whether it was lightning or a controlled burn. A sudden shift in pollen tells us the landscape changed, but not whether it was due to climate or cultivation. Microbial DNA may record chemical stress, but it cannot tell us whether that stress came from industry or from geology. Like all archives, biology preserves facts, but leaves the meaning ambiguous. Yet ambiguity is not futility. To read the biological archive of Antarctica is to listen for patterns that do not fit the rhythms of natural cycles. If we found a forest that all burned in a single season, a sudden disappearance of native plants paired with the rise of crops, or microbial signals of contaminants unknown in nature, then we would have whispers worth considering. Whispers that suggest intelligence touched the biosphere, even if all else was erased. Antarctica's biological archive is vast, but it is largely unread. Beneath miles of ice lie layers of sediment waiting to be drilled, waiting to reveal their pollen, their spores, their fossilized wood. Within subglacial lakes swim microbes whose genetic codes carry echoes of ancient environments. These archives do not shout, but they do not lie. If a forgotten civilization ever pressed its hand upon Antarctica, the biosphere itself may still bear the faint impression. To look into biology is to remember that life records life. The Earth is always watching itself, always keeping notes in trees, in spores, in DNA. The archive is never complete, but it is persistent. And in Antarctica, where ice conceals but also preserves, those biological notes may wait like sealed letters, unopened for millions of years. Every civilization, every species lives within the boundaries of its environment. When that environment shifts too quickly or too violently, the living world leaves behind a stark message: extinction. Antarctica, with its glaciers and fossil layers, is a keeper of such messages. Its rocks and ice contain records of vanishings, sudden, sometimes global, sometimes local, that ripple through time like the fading notes of a song. To search for a forgotten civilization beneath the ice is also to ask, could its disappearance be folded into the larger patterns of extinction that Antarctica preserves? Extinction is not a rare event in Earth's history. It is a recurring rhythm, sometimes soft and subtle, sometimes thunderous and absolute. The disappearance of the dinosaurs 66 million years ago is perhaps the most famous, linked to an asteroid impact that left its chemical fingerprint around the world. But Antarctica carries quieter records too. Fossil beds where species vanish abruptly, pollen layers where forests give way to tundra, ice cores that capture sudden plunges in temperature or spikes in greenhouse gases. These are pages in the planet's diary, chapters written in the language of absence. Now imagine those absences in a different light. Suppose an extinction event in the Antarctic record coincided not only with climate shifts or volcanic eruptions, but with unusual chemical signals, traces of burning far beyond natural wildfires, spikes of metals not easily explained, or isotopes that whisper of artificial processes. Could such a convergence suggest something more than geology or chance? Could it hint at the fall of a culture, a people, or even an experiment in life that vanished without memorial? The idea may sound improbable, but consider how humanity itself has reshaped extinction patterns in only a few centuries. From the dodo to the passenger pigeon, from mammoths hunted into memory to rainforests cleared in decades, our species has left an unmistakable imprint on the biosphere. If humans were to vanish tomorrow, the fossil record of the future would show a sudden thinning of large mammals, a rearrangement of forests, and an explosion of rats, dogs, and domesticated species. These changes would be sharp, unnatural in their speed, and unmistakable to any paleontologist millions of years hence. If another civilization once walked the Earth, Their impact on extinction patterns could also be sharp. Sudden disappearances of species, sudden rises of others, anomalies that break the quiet rhythm of evolution. Antarctica's fossil forests offer one lens. In some layers, species vanish suddenly, replaced by cold-tolerant plants or nothing at all. Most of these changes reflect the advance of ice, the slow turning of climate. But what if one layer held a faster change? Species gone not in millennia, but in decades. That would be a pattern too abrupt for natural cycles, a signal worth listening to. Ice cores offer another. Within them are records of ancient atmospheres, of methane and carbon dioxide levels that rise and fall. A sudden, sharp spike could indicate vast burning of forests, or something more deliberate. Even if no ruins remain, such atmospheric anomalies could hint at a civilization's decline, at the moment when its presence collapsed into silence. Of course, interpretation is fragile. Extinctions have many causes: asteroids, volcanoes, shifting seas. To ascribe one to civilization requires extraordinary evidence. But the point is not to prove, only to imagine responsibly. The patterns of extinction Antarctica preserves remind us that absence itself can be data, that vanishing is as telling as survival. In a way, extinction patterns are the most poignant of all signals. They do not preserve names or stories. They do not tell us who or what was lost. They tell us only that something was here and that it is gone. If civilization once touched Antarctica, its disappearance might be written not in ruins, but in the sudden silence of species that once lived alongside it. The glaciers have hidden much, but they have also kept the memory of loss. And in that memory, faint though it is, lies the possibility of stories untold. Antarctica may appear timeless, a frozen world where nothing changes, but beneath its silence lies a stage where some of Earth's most dramatic catastrophes have played out. The continent has witnessed asteroid strikes, volcanic eruptions, and sudden climate collapses. Its rocks and ice are not only archives of slow change but also of violent upheaval, moments when the planet's story turned sharply and life was forced to begin again. If a civilization once touched this land, these catastrophes could explain its disappearance and its concealment. One of the most striking reminders of Antarctica's catastrophic past is buried beneath the ice of Wilkes Land. There, scientists have detected a massive circular anomaly, hundreds of kilometers across, in the bedrock. Some suggest it could be the scar of an asteroid impact, perhaps dating back 250 million years, around the time of the greatest extinction event in Earth's history, the Permian-Triassic catastrophe, when more than 90% of species vanished. Whether the Wilkes Land structure is truly an impact crater remains debated, but its presence reminds us that Antarctica is no stranger to cataclysm. Ice cores also preserve evidence of catastrophe. Thin layers of volcanic ash, spread like soot across millennia, mark the eruptions that darkened skies and cooled climates. Each layer is a snapshot of a sudden disruption, moments when life was forced to adapt or perish. In some cores, sharp chemical spikes suggest global-scale events, perhaps even linked to asteroid impacts or colossal volcanic outbursts. Antarctica records these disasters not in stories or myths, but in the quiet accumulation of particles within ice. Such catastrophes matter deeply for our question of forgotten civilizations. For what better way to erase a people than through the dual forces of fire and ice? Imagine a culture thriving in a warmer Antarctica, building, planting, living. Then imagine the sudden arrival of catastrophe, a comet fragment striking the ocean, triggering floods and tsunamis. A volcanic eruption releasing ash that buries forests and poisons rivers, or a rapid shift in climate that brings glaciers surging forward. Within generations, such a culture could be extinguished, its works swallowed by ice, its memory erased except for the faintest of residues. History reminds us that even great civilizations are vulnerable to catastrophe. The eruption of Thera around 1600 BCE devastated the Minoans of the Aegean. The climatic shifts of the Little Ice Age strained medieval Europe. Earthquakes leveled cities, floods swept away villages. If such disasters could disrupt societies in warm, fertile lands, how much more devastating would they have been in the precarious environment of Antarctica, perched always on the edge between habitability and hostility? To imagine Antarctica as catastrophe's stage is not to indulge in apocalyptic fantasy, but to recognize its geological reality. The continent has carried the weight of asteroid scars, volcanic pulses, and climate shocks for hundreds of millions of years. Its silence today is not the silence of peace, but the silence after many storms. If civilization once found a foothold there, it may have been erased not by slow erosion alone, but by sudden and overwhelming catastrophe. And yet, catastrophe can preserve as well as destroy. An impact can bury, sealing sediments quickly and locking away clues. A sudden advance of glaciers can entomb a landscape, freezing its memory in place. Catastrophe is both eraser and archivist, wiping the surface clean while pressing some details deeper into the geological record. It may be in these buried scars that the faintest signals of Antarctica's hidden history remain. Antarctica is not only a frozen wilderness, it is a palimpsest of calamities, a continent that remembers disaster even as it buries it. To walk upon its ice is to stand upon layers of catastrophe stacked like forgotten chapters, and perhaps, somewhere among those layers, lies the erased page of a civilization that once was. If the earth has a rhythm, it is one of creation and destruction, of flourishing and erasure. Across its vast history, the planet has pressed what we might call its reset buttons, moments when life was forced to start over, often from near zero. These events remind us of a sobering truth. Civilizations, no matter how advanced, exist only at the mercy of Earth's cycles. If a forgotten civilization ever flourished in Antarctica, its fate may well have been sealed by one of these global resets. Perhaps the most famous of these events is the Cretaceous-Paleogene, or KPG extinction, 66 million years ago. An asteroid struck the Yucatan Peninsula, unleashing energy greater than all the world's nuclear weapons combined. The skies darkened, forests burned, oceans acidified. Dinosaurs, who had ruled the Earth for over 150 million years, vanished almost overnight. Their absence cleared space for mammals to rise, but the price was a world remade in fire and ash. Antarctica, too, bears traces of this reset. Chemical markers in sediments, fossil gaps, a silent testimony to the global scale of that catastrophe. Even more devastating was the Permian-Triassic extinction, roughly 252 million years ago. Known grimly as the Great Dying, it eliminated more than 90% of marine species and 70% of land species. The cause remains debated. Perhaps massive volcanic eruptions in Siberia, perhaps methane release, perhaps asteroid impact, or a combination of all. Whatever the cause, it was the closest life has come to total annihilation. Antarctica, part of the supercontinent Pangaea at the time, would have felt the full brunt of this planetary convulsion. If civilizations had existed then, they would not have survived. These reset events teach us that history is not linear, but cyclical. Civilizations rise, ecosystems flourish, and then, in a geological instant, the board is cleared. The survivors begin again, often bearing no memory of what came before. Rock remembers, ice remembers, but life itself forgets, moving forward into new forms and leaving only faint signals of what was lost. For us, the idea of resets is unsettling. We imagine continuity, progress building on progress, knowledge accumulating into permanence. Yet the Earth tells another story, one of interruption. What if humanity is not the first to climb this ladder, but simply the most recent? What if earlier civilizations, perhaps rare and fragile, rose during warmer periods in Antarctica or elsewhere, only to be swept away by resets so thorough that only isotopes and anomalies remain? Even our own civilization is not immune. Were a similar asteroid to strike today, our global networks, cities, and archives would be fragile defenses. Within centuries, little would remain but chemical markers, carbon spikes, plastic traces, artificial isotopes. In a million years, even those signals would blur. Civilization, in the face of Earth's resets, is as temporary as a footprint in snow. Yet resets are not only endings, they are also beginnings. The KPG extinction cleared the stage for mammals and eventually for us. The Permian-Triassic reset reshaped the oceans, setting the stage for new ecosystems to emerge. Resets are brutal, but they also renew. They erase, but they also allow. This duality is crucial when we imagine forgotten civilizations. If they were lost, it may have been through such resets. If they once thrived, it was because earlier resets cleared the way. Antarctica, as both archive and eraser, is central to this story. Its rocks and ice carry scars of these resets, scars that remind us of life's vulnerability and resilience. To look at the continent is to see not only ice, but memory of catastrophe. If any human-like presence ever walked there, its survival would have been at the mercy of these planetary convulsions. The great resets teach humility. They remind us that the Earth's timeline is not ours to command, that our place within it is fragile, provisional. They whisper that forgetting is built into the planet's design. And so, when we ask whether Antarctica could hold the memory of a lost civilization, we must also ask, how many times has the Earth already pressed the reset button, erasing stories we will never know? For as long as people have told stories, they have spoken of lost lands. The most enduring of these tales is Atlantis, first described by Plato in the dialogues Timaeus and Critias. According to his account, Atlantis was a mighty civilization, advanced in knowledge and power, that fell in a single night of catastrophe, sinking beneath the sea. Scholars debate whether Plato meant his tale as allegory or history, but the image endures, a civilization erased, leaving only whispers in myth. Why does Atlantis haunt our imagination so deeply? Perhaps because it embodies a fear and a hope at once. The fear is that what we build may vanish, erased by forces greater than ourselves. The hope is that greatness has existed before us, that the human story is richer, longer, and more complex than our history books allow. In this tension, Atlantis becomes more than a place. It becomes a mirror of our desire to belong to something larger than the present moment. Antarctica, though never named in Plato's text, has often been folded into this mythic current. Early explorers, uncertain of the continent's true shape, speculated about a great southern land, Terra Australis Incognita, believed to balance the continents of the north. Maps were drawn with vast imaginary landmasses, and sailors spoke of lands hidden by ice. As Antarctica emerged into our awareness in the 19th century, some began to see it as a candidate for Atlantis itself, a civilization frozen rather than drowned, buried beneath ice instead of waves. Legends from other cultures add to this resonance. Polynesian myths speak of islands that vanished beneath the sea. South American traditions tell of lands beyond the southern horizon, sometimes linked with knowledge or catastrophe. Medieval maps labeled unknown southern regions as lands of parrots and giants. While none of these can be tied directly to Antarctica, they echo with the same archetype: the southern land as mystery, as origin, as loss. Skeptics rightly point out that myths are not evidence. Atlantis may be no more than philosophy disguised as story, a warning about hubris rather than a memory of a real place. Terra Australis was an invention of cartographers, not a record of travelers. To equate myth with geography risks collapsing poetry into science. And yet, myths have a way of preserving memory, even if distorted. Flood stories, told across cultures from Mesopotamia to the Americas, echo real events of rising seas after the Ice Age. Might some tales of lost lands reflect encounters with Antarctica, or with lands at its edge before ice claimed them? The allure lies in the shadows. We cannot say that Atlantis was Antarctica, nor that Terra Australis pointed to real civilizations. But we can acknowledge that humanity's imagination has long been drawn southward, toward hidden continents and forgotten ages. The shadow of Atlantis falls across Antarctica, not because the two are identical, but because they share a symbolic space. Both represent the possibility of memory erased, of greatness concealed beneath silence. For us, the value of the myth is not in proving it true, but in recognizing the yearning it expresses. We long to know that our story is not the first, that others came before, that the earth is deeper and stranger than we realize. Antarctica, with its forests turned to fossils and its valleys buried in ice, feeds that longing. It may not be Atlantis, but it is Atlantis-like. A place where the line between history and legend blurs, where absence becomes possibility, and where silence itself tells a story. And so, the shadow of Atlantis stretches over our question, not as evidence, but as echo, not as map, but as metaphor. It reminds us that even if no civilization ever thrived beneath Antarctica's ice, the very idea of one has power, the power to make us question what we know, and to wonder what lies hidden at the edges of memory. If myths like Atlantis whisper of forgotten worlds, maps sometimes appear to show them. Among the most controversial artifacts in the history of exploration is the Piri Reis map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral. On its worn parchment are coastlines of Europe, Africa, and the Americas, regions newly revealed to European eyes. But one section of the map has fueled centuries of speculation, a coastline drawn far to the south, resembling to some the outline of Antarctica. What makes the Piri Reis map so provocative is not just its age, but its detail. The southern coastline is shown without ice, with bays and inlets where today glaciers descend into the sea. To some, this suggests knowledge of Antarctica before its discovery, knowledge passed down from ancient seafarers or civilizations long forgotten. If true, it would imply a memory older than history itself, a memory that slipped into a 16th century map through unknown channels. But the story is not so simple. Scholars caution that the coastline on the Piri Reis map may not be Antarctica at all, but rather a distorted drawing of South America, stretched and reshaped by copying errors. Medieval and Renaissance mapmakers often combined sources, blending hearsay, speculation, and fragments of earlier charts. The result was not always accurate geography, but a collage of memory and imagination. What looks like Antarctica may be no more than cartographic noise. Other maps, too, have stirred similar debates. The Orontius Phineas map of 1531 shows a vast southern landmass with rivers and mountains, oddly suggestive of Antarctica's subglacial topography. The Boache map of 1737 depicts a southern continent split into two islands, not unlike the land beneath the Antarctic ice. Were these maps inspired by ancient knowledge, or were they speculative guesses, later coincidentally validated by modern discoveries? Here lies the difficulty. Maps are both practical tools and works of imagination. They are as much about what people believed as about what they knew. When we project certainty onto their ambiguities, we risk mistaking human error for hidden truth, and yet, it is precisely their ambiguity that keeps them alive in our imagination. They tempt us to wonder, what if someone, long before us, charted lands now lost to ice? Skepticism is essential. There is no firm evidence that the Piri Reis map, or any like it, preserves knowledge of Antarctica before its official discovery. The distortions can be explained by copying, by guesswork, by the limitations of projecting a spherical world onto flat parchment. But skepticism does not erase the fascination. The maps remain impossible not because they prove hidden civilizations, but because they embody the tension between what is known and what is imagined. In the end, these maps remind us of a truth deeper than cartography. Human beings are drawn to fill the blanks. When we see empty spaces on a globe, in history, or under the ice, we cannot resist sketching possibilities. Sometimes those sketches are wrong. Sometimes, however, they anticipate truths not yet discovered. Antarctica, the last continent to be explored, is the greatest blank space of all. Its presence on old maps, whether mistaken or intentional, is a mirror of our desire to see beyond the horizon, to imagine what lies hidden. The Piri Reis map may not prove that civilizations once charted the frozen south, but it proves that the idea of such civilizations has haunted us for centuries. And perhaps that is its real significance, not as evidence, but as symbol. A map of the impossible, pointing less to geography than to imagination. An invitation, in ink and parchment, to keep asking what else might lie beyond the edge of the known world. The search for hidden civilizations beneath Antarctica is filled with a paradox. On the one hand, science provides us with tools sensitive enough to detect the faintest anomalies, shifts in isotopes, unusual concentrations of metals, strange patterns in fossils. On the other hand, nature is a master of imitation. The planet's own processes often produce signals that look artificial, even purposeful, when in fact, they are entirely natural. To mistake these echoes for evidence would be easy. To separate one from the other is the true challenge. Consider volcanic ash. Antarctica is not as lifeless as it appears. Beneath its ice lie active volcanoes, some of which still smolder today. Eruptions scatter ash high into the atmosphere, leaving behind dark layers within ice cores. These layers can look like the signature of widespread burning, similar to the carbon spikes that might result from agriculture or industrial fires. To the untrained eye, they might suggest civilization. Yet in truth, they are the breath of the earth itself, the rhythms of magma and mantle. Meteorites present another kind of false signal. Antarctica is one of the richest places in the world to find them, not because it is struck more often, but because its ice preserves and concentrates the fragments. Many of these meteorites contain exotic metals, nickel, iridium, even rare isotopes, that can resemble the chemical footprints of mining or smelting. A sudden layer rich in iridium, for example, once puzzled scientists until it was linked to the asteroid that ended the reign of the dinosaurs. To confuse such signals with intelligent extraction would be tempting, but misleading. Even glaciers themselves can create illusions. As they grind mountains into dust, they scatter minerals in patterns that can seem deliberate. Lines of boulders arranged like walls, moraines that look like embankments, striations that mimic tool marks. These are works of slow motion, created not by hands, but by pressure and time. Yet to stumble upon such formations without context could awaken the thought, who placed these here? There are subtler examples still. Methane trapped in ice can spike suddenly, hinting at industrial release, but in reality, it may come from microbial blooms beneath ancient lakes. Concentrations of heavy metals in soil may look like waste from smelting, but they can also result from volcanic fumaroles. Even isotopes of radiation, so often cited as unmistakable evidence of nuclear processes, can be produced in small amounts by cosmic rays striking the atmosphere. This ambiguity is not a flaw in science. It is its discipline. To interpret signals is to walk a narrow path between wonder and rigor. The Silurian hypothesis, posed by scientists in recent years, makes this point clearly. If an industrial civilization had existed millions of years ago, its traces would be nearly indistinguishable from natural processes. Carbon spikes could mean industry or volcanoes. Metal anomalies could mean mining or meteorites. The line between nature and intelligence blurs in the deep past, leaving us only with questions. And yet, false signals do not diminish the search. Instead, they sharpen it. They remind us that evidence must be weighed carefully, that anomalies alone are not proof. They teach us humility in the face of Earth's complexity. A rock may look like a tool, but it is just as likely to be the child of pressure and chance. An ash layer may look like civilization's fire, but it may be only the volcano's breath. For Antarctica, this lesson is crucial. The continent is a place where natural forces are amplified. Glaciers sculpt, volcanoes erupt, meteorites accumulate. It is a land of illusions, where signals abound, but interpretations are perilous. To seek civilization beneath the ice is to accept that most of what we find will be ambiguous, that nature will always offer competing explanations. Perhaps that is the deeper meaning. If we ever uncover a true artificial signal, it will not come without doubt. It will arrive clothed in ambiguity, demanding patience, skepticism, and imagination in equal measure. Antarctica will never give up its secrets easily. Its language is one of riddles, and nature itself is the author of most of them. In this way, false signals are not disappointments, but teachers. They remind us that the silence of Antarctica may be layered with echoes, some natural, some perhaps not, but all worth listening to. For in the listening, in the act of weighing possibility against probability, we engage most deeply with the mystery itself. Let us pause the march of deep time and bring the question closer to home. Imagine that humanity, as it exists today, vanished suddenly from Antarctica. The research stations at McMurdo, Amundsen Scott, and dozens of smaller outposts would be left behind, silent against the endless wind. No helicopters would land, no ships would resupply, no heaters would hum. The outposts would become monuments not to our triumph over the cold, but to our absence. What would happen next? Within a few years, Snow would drift against their walls, covering doors and windows. Metal structures would corrode in the salt-laden air. Plastics, glass, and steel would begin their long surrender to frost and pressure. The continent would continue its patient work of erasure, grinding down the evidence of human occupation with the same indifference it applies to mountains. Fast forward 10,000 years. By then, most of the stations would be crushed beneath advancing ice. Steel beams would buckle, concrete would splinter, plastics would fragment. No recognizable building would remain. If a future geologist were to arrive, they would find only a disturbed patch of sediment, perhaps a faintly unnatural distribution of metals in the soil. Anomalies, not monuments. Extend the vision further. 100,000 years. The glaciers would have carried fragments of our stations toward the sea, scattering their remains across the ocean floor. Plastics would persist as microscopic grains. Radioisotopes from fuel or scientific experiments might still be detectable, faint but real. Perhaps a strange layer of soot, left from the burning of diesel fuel, would appear in an ice core. Nothing would resemble a city, nothing would resemble us. And yet, signals would remain, woven into chemistry and geology. Now stretch the timeline to 1 million years. By then, even the traces would be faint. Plastics might endure as plastiglomerates fused into stone. A handful of long-lived isotopes might still whisper of our presence. But to detect them would require patience, precision, and interpretation. To anyone who stumbled upon them without context, they might appear natural. A volcanic eruption, a meteorite fall, a quirk of chemistry. The human story, on that timescale, would be reduced to anomalies, whispers so quiet they could be mistaken for noise. This thought experiment illustrates the fragility of evidence across deep time. If our own civilization, with satellites in orbit and cities of steel, could vanish so completely within a geological blink, how much easier would it be for a smaller, earlier civilization to disappear without trace? The lesson is not that such civilizations existed, but that if they did, their erasure would be nearly total. The silence we perceive is not proof, but the natural consequence of time's relentless scale. And yet silence does not mean absence. Even in this experiment, faint clues survive. Plastics, isotopes, unusual metals. They endure not because we intend them to, but because chemistry and physics make them stubborn. They are our accidental monuments, our unplanned legacy. If another civilization once touched Antarctica, perhaps their equivalents, strange residues, fragments fused into stone, isotopes sealed in ice, still wait to be found. Picture a future scientist drilling deep into Antarctic ice long after we are gone. They retrieve a core and notice a thin band where carbon isotopes shift abruptly, where traces of microplastics shimmer under the microscope. They may not know what it means. They may debate whether it is natural or artificial, but they will know one thing. Something unusual happened here. Something that does not fit the quiet rhythm of glaciers. The thought experiment humbles us. It shows how temporary our presence is, how little remains even after an age of industry. But it also sharpens our imagination. When we look into Antarctica's past and see silence, we must ask, are we seeing nothing, or are we seeing the faint echoes of something erased? The difference is subtle, but it is the very heart of the mystery. When we measure history, we often think in centuries. Sometimes when we stretch our imagination, we think in millennia. But Antarctica reminds us that the true scale of Earth's memory is not thousands of years, but millions. To look into the continent's ice and rock is to enter deep time, an expanse so vast that our entire species, with all its stories and cities, barely registers as a blink. To ask whether a civilization once flourished there is to ask whether faint traces could survive across spans of time that make written history seem like an instant. Let us return to the thought experiment of our own Antarctic bases. After 10,000 years, they would be gone, their remains crushed and scattered. After 100,000, only fragments, plastics, isotopes, unusual distributions of metals might remain. Now extend the timeline again, 1 million years. 10 million, 100 million. On such scales, continents drift, mountains rise and crumble, seas advance and retreat. Glaciers expand, then vanish, volcanoes erupt, then fall silent. In this vast churn, what could possibly endure? And yet some signals do endure. Fossils of plants and animals survive across hundreds of millions of years. Ash layers from volcanic eruptions remain identifiable long after the volcano itself has been eroded into hills. The thin line of iridium that marks the asteroid impact at the end of the Cretaceous has persisted for 66 million years, still visible in rocks on every continent. Even subtle signals, like isotope ratios in ancient sediments, can last across unimaginable spans. So what of civilization? If a technological culture once flourished in Antarctica tens of thousands or even millions of years ago, what would remain? Not monuments, not bones, not tools, but perhaps chemical signals, carbon isotope anomalies, plastiglomerates, long-lived radioisotopes. These are not as visible as pyramids, but they are more durable. They can survive the grind of glaciers, the drift of continents, even the slow decay of rock itself. They are faint, but they are stubborn. This is why scaling to deep time changes the question. The absence of ruins does not mean absence of civilization. It means that ruins are not the kind of evidence we should expect. Instead, we must look for signals that endure across millions of years, signals that are less about structure and more about chemistry. In this way, Antarctica becomes not a graveyard of monuments, but a library of anomalies. But even here, interpretation is fraught. A spike in carbon isotopes could mean industry, but it could also mean volcanism. A concentration of metals could mean mining, or it could mean meteorites. A layer of radioisotopes could mean nuclear technology, or it could mean a cosmic event. Deep time does not give us certainty, it gives us riddles. To read those riddles requires both rigor and humility may be the greatest lesson of all. When we look into deep time, we see how fleeting we are. Our entire written history fits comfortably within a single thin slice of an ice core. Our civilizations rise and fall faster than glaciers advance or retreat. The monuments we believe eternal are fragile compared to the durability of ash, pollen, or isotopes. We are temporary marks on a canvas painted across billions of years. Scaling to deep time forces us to ask, if another civilization once walked the earth, how would we ever know? And if we vanished tomorrow, how would anyone know we were here? The answer is the same in both cases. Only through faint signals, anomalies in the record, patterns that resist simple explanation. Antarctica, with its vast memory of ice and stone, is one of the few places where such signals might still lie hidden. To study it is to peer not just into history, but into the deep fabric of time itself, where civilizations, if they ever existed, are reduced to whispers. Whispers that may endure for millions of years, waiting for someone with the patience and the humility to listen. At a certain point in the search for lost civilizations, we encounter a boundary, not of ice, but of knowledge itself. Antarctica, with all its vastness and silence, confronts us with a reminder that the absence of evidence is not the same as the evidence of absence. It is tempting to draw firm conclusions, either to claim certainty that no civilization ever touched the southern continent, or to insist with equal certainty that one must have. Yet the truth lies somewhere softer, somewhere humbler. Antarctica teaches us the humility of unknowing. Science thrives on evidence. It is cautious, skeptical, precise. It demands repeatable results, verifiable data, patterns that can be explained. And in Antarctica, the evidence we possess speaks mostly of natural forces, glaciers grinding rock, volcanoes scattering ash, forests turning slowly into fossils. Nothing we have found points clearly, unambiguously, to a civilization buried beneath the ice, and so, by science's measure, the safest answer is silence. Yet silence does not close the question. The very processes that make Antarctica so difficult to inhabit also make it nearly impossible for evidence to survive. Glaciers erase landscapes. Tectonics shift them. Erosion buries, scatters, and obliterates. What chance would a settlement, a village, or even a city have of leaving a clear signal after millions of years? Even our own skyscrapers would not endure. The humility of unknowing means accepting that erasure itself is the norm, not the exception. In this light, to say we have found nothing is not the same as saying there was nothing to find. It is only to acknowledge the limits of survival and detection. The fossil record itself is notoriously incomplete. Most species that have ever lived left no trace. The same must be true of human or human-like presence. For every artifact preserved, countless others are gone forever. This humility does not weaken science. It strengthens it. To admit what we do not know, to recognize the boundaries of certainty, is to keep the door open for discovery. If tomorrow an anomalous isotope were discovered in Antarctic ice, or a plastiglomerate pebble from a layer millions of years old, it would not prove a forgotten civilization. But it would add a whisper to the silence, a reason to listen more closely. Humility also means holding imagination alongside skepticism. It allows us to wonder responsibly, to imagine what might have been without insisting that it was. In this way, Antarctica becomes not just a place of absence, but a place of possibility. Its silence is not a verdict, but an invitation to keep asking questions, even when answers remain elusive. There is a deeper lesson here, too. The humility of unknowing reminds us that our own presence on Earth is brief, fragile, and easily erased. If future beings were to search for us in deep time, they too might find nothing but ambiguous signals. They might wonder whether we ever existed at all. Our skyscrapers, satellites, and stories, all the things we believe permanent, would dissolve into dust and be forgotten. Only faint chemical residues might remain. We, too, could become a civilization erased, our memory dependent on the patience of whoever comes next. Perhaps that is the quiet gift Antarctica offers. Not proof of hidden civilizations, but perspective. It reminds us that we are not outside the story of forgetting. We are part of it. We are as vulnerable to erasure as any who may have come before. To face that truth is not despair, but humility. It allows us to see our place in the long rhythm of Earth's history, to understand that we are temporary guests in a world that keeps its deepest secrets well hidden. And so, when we stand upon Antarctica's ice and gaze at the horizon, we do not see answers, We see questions, sharpened by silence. We see possibility, framed by humility. And perhaps that is enough, that the humility of unknowing keeps us listening, keeps us searching, keeps us open to the whispers that may yet emerge from beneath the frozen mantle. To understand Antarctica is to learn a new way of listening. The continent does not speak in words, nor does it offer ruins for us to decipher like books. Instead, its voice comes through stone and ice, two mediums that carry the memory of time more faithfully than any parchment. They are patient archivists, preserving stories in the language of chemistry, pressure, and frozen air. If we wish to know whether a forgotten civilization once touched this land, we must train ourselves to hear their subtle whispers. Stone speaks slowly, but it speaks with clarity. Layers of sediment record the rise and fall of seas. Strata of volcanic rock preserve the rhythm of eruptions. Mineral veins reveal the pressures of tectonic collision. Fossils capture the outlines of life that once flourished. Each page in this stony book requires effort to read, but the words are there for those with patience. To a geologist, Antarctica is not silence. It is a library. Ice, meanwhile, is the more delicate but no less profound record keeper. Within its translucent layers are bubbles of ancient atmosphere, perfectly preserved for hundreds of thousands of years. A single core, drilled deep into the ice, can reveal the breath of long-vanished forests, the smoke of distant fires, even the faint trace of industrial chemicals. The ice remembers things too fragile for stone to keep. The chemistry of air, the pattern of seasons, the fingerprints of climate. It is like listening to a whisper caught in a crystal, a murmur of a world that no longer exists. Together, stone and ice tell a story neither could tell alone. Stone remembers the grand movements of continents and the rise and fall of life. Ice remembers the fleeting details, the smoke, the gases, the daily rhythms of the atmosphere. Between them lies the possibility of discovery. If a civilization once burned forests, stone might show the charcoal while ice records the carbon. If metals were mined, stone might preserve the seams while ice captures the airborne residues. If technology altered the atmosphere, ice would whisper the anomaly even as stone remembered the ash. But listening to stone and ice is not easy. Their voices are subtle, and they often overlap with nature's own songs. A spike of carbon dioxide may mean industry, or it may mean a volcanic eruption. A seam of metals may reflect mining, or it may reflect a meteorite. The challenge lies not in hearing the whispers, but in interpreting them. We must approach with humility, aware that the signals we hear may not say what we wish them to say. And yet, the act of listening itself is profound. To take an ice core, to split a rock, is to open a page of Earth's diary. Each sample is a sentence written across unimaginable spans of time. In those sentences are both clarity and mystery. Sometimes they confirm what we know. Volcanoes erupt, climates shift, glaciers advance. Sometimes they hint at what we do not know, anomalies, absences, patterns that resist explanation. In this way, listening to stone and ice becomes an act of wonder as much as science. It is not about proving a civilization existed beneath the glaciers, but about acknowledging that the Earth keeps secrets we are only beginning to uncover. Rock and ice do not lie. They simply speak a language we are still learning. The deeper we listen, the more we realize how much remains unread, how many stories still lie sealed in frozen vaults and buried strata. If a forgotten civilization did exist in Antarctica, It would not be waiting for us in clear ruins or intact artifacts. It would be waiting in anomalies, in whispers, in the subtle dialogue of stone and ice. And whether or not we ever decipher those whispers, the act of listening itself brings us closer to the heart of the mystery. For in the end, Antarctica does not need to give us answers to be meaningful. Its silence, when we learn to listen, becomes a conversation in itself. A reminder that Earth's memory is vast, that our knowledge is small, and that some secrets are meant to be approached not with certainty, but with reverence. On modern maps, Antarctica is no longer a blank space. Its coastlines are charted, its mountain ranges mapped by satellites, its glaciers measured with precision. And yet, in a deeper sense, Antarctica remains the last great frontier. Not because we cannot see its surface, but because so little of what lies beneath has been touched. The continent is more than ice. It is a vault, a shield, and perhaps a secret. Consider its scale. Antarctica is larger than Europe, larger than the United States and Mexico combined. Beneath its ice lie mountain ranges as tall as the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and lakes the size of entire countries. These features are not visible to the naked eye. They are revealed only by radar, seismic surveys, and drilling projects. To stand on the Antarctic plateau is to stand above hidden worlds, places that have not seen sunlight for millions of years. Among these hidden features is Lake Vostok, buried beneath more than 2 miles of ice. Its waters have been sealed off for perhaps 15 million years, untouched by the atmosphere, isolated in darkness. When scientists finally drilled into it, they found microbial life adapted to extreme conditions, hinting at the resilience of biology in places once thought sterile. Lake Vostok is just one of more than 400 subglacial lakes known to exist. Each is a frontier in itself, a hidden biosphere waiting to be explored. Antarctica also hides mountain ranges like the Gamburtsev Mountains, buried beneath ice thicker than the Himalayas. Discovered only through seismic echoes, they remain shrouded in mystery. How long have they stood there? What sediments lie within their valleys? What fossils may be preserved in their rocks? These questions remind us how little we know of the continent's foundation. And then there are the meteorites. Antarctica is the richest hunting ground for them on Earth. The ice concentrates fragments that have fallen from space, preserving them in pristine condition. Some meteorites from Antarctica have been traced to Mars, carrying with them the possibility of microbial fossils from another planet. In this way, the continent is not only a frontier of Earth's history, but of cosmic history as well. For our question of forgotten civilizations, this frontier status is crucial. If traces exist, chemical anomalies, plastiglomerates, isotopes, they would most likely be hidden deep beneath ice in sediments untouched for millions of years. To find them would require persistence, drilling, and the humility to search where answers are not guaranteed. The continent guards its secrets fiercely. Yet the frontier is not just physical, it is also philosophical. Antarctica challenges how we think about absence, how we interpret silence. It asks whether we are willing to consider possibilities beyond what we can immediately see. It is a place where science meets imagination, where the known world blurs into the unknown. And perhaps that is why Antarctica continues to captivate us. It is the last great frontier not because it promises treasure or conquest, but because it promises mystery. In a world where nearly every coastline is mapped, every mountain scaled, and every desert crossed, Antarctica remains a space of wonder, a reminder that the Earth still holds secrets too vast for us to claim. To walk upon its ice is to stand at the edge of the human story, looking into a silence that stretches both backward into deep time and forward into the unknown. If civilizations once flourished here, they are buried not only under ice, but under the weight of our own assumptions. To see them would require more than instruments. It would require imagination. In this way, Antarctica is not only a frontier of geography, but of thought. It asks us to see beyond the visible, to hear beyond the silence, to wonder without demanding certainty. And perhaps that is what makes it the last great frontier. Not that it hides answers, but that it keeps us asking questions. When we think of civilizations lost to time, we imagine them buried in sand, swallowed by jungle, or submerged beneath rising seas. But Antarctica suggests another possibility, a civilization not destroyed, but preserved, entombed in deep freeze. The very force that erases monuments on the surface, the advancing ice, could also act as a vault, sealing away fragments of a world that once was. Ice is a paradoxical preserver. It crushes, it grinds, it obliterates. And yet, it also keeps. Mammoths have been found in Siberian permafrost, their flesh still intact after tens of thousands of years. Pollen grains remain suspended in ancient ice cores, perfectly preserved down to the cellular level. Even viruses, long thought extinct, have been revived from frozen soils. The cold does not nurture life, but it protects memory, holding it in suspension. If life and matter can be preserved in this way, could traces of civilization also endure? Picture a settlement along the edge of an ancient Antarctic forest, thousands or even millions of years ago. When the climate shifted and glaciers advanced, their homes, tools, and pathways would have been engulfed. The wood would rot, the stone would be ground down, but perhaps something endured. A fragment of worked bone trapped in ice, a shard of ceramic carried into a glacier and locked away. A residue of soot from fires, sealed within an annual snow layer. Each is fragile, but each is possible. To find such traces would not be easy. They would not be waiting in plain sight, like the ruins of Rome or the pyramids of Egypt. They would lie deep beneath, hidden in layers we have scarcely begun to probe. Antarctica's ice is more than a surface. It is a vertical archive, a timeline descending millions of years. To read it fully would take drilling deeper than we have ever gone, into places where pressure and darkness conceal secrets yet unopened. And yet fragments already hint at this possibility. Fossilized forests discovered beneath the ice prove that entire ecosystems have been preserved, waiting for us to uncover them. Ancient pollen, spores, and sediments tell us what kinds of plants once grew, what climates once prevailed. If nature's memory is this precise, who is to say that human or human-like traces could not also be there, folded into the layers? We must be careful, of course. The imagination leaps easily from forests to cities, from pollen to pottery. But caution does not erase possibility. It only asks us to move slowly, to weigh every anomaly with care. If we ever find such a trace, it will likely be small, almost unremarkable at first glance. A fleck of plastic-like residue in ancient sediment, a peculiar isotopic spike, a stone whose fractures suggest not geology, but craft. These would be the faint echoes of a civilization in deep freeze, fragile, ambiguous, but real. In truth, the idea of preservation beneath ice is not entirely speculative. Archaeologists already use frozen contexts to study the recent past. In the Alps, the body of Ötzi the Iceman was discovered, preserved for over 5,000 years in a glacier. His clothes, tools, Even the contents of his stomach were intact, offering a direct window into a vanished world. If 5,000 years can be preserved so clearly, what might 5 million years hold if conditions align? The challenge is scale. Otzi was preserved because he was caught in a precise moment of burial, frozen quickly, protected from disturbance, sealed away. A civilization would require many such moments, multiplied across landscapes, for any meaningful trace to survive. And yet, even a single fragment could change everything. A single worked object, sealed in deep freeze, would transform speculation into history. Antarctica, then, is both eraser and archive. It wipes away the grand, the visible, the monumental. But in its deeper layers, it may hold the small, the fragile, the nearly invisible. A civilization in deep freeze would not return to us as cities or temples, but as whispers, a shard, a signal, a sliver of memory preserved in ice. To wonder about such a possibility is not to claim certainty. It is to recognize that the Earth's coldest continent may also be its most patient vault. If secrets lie hidden, they are not lost. They are simply waiting. And so we arrive at the edge of the mystery. We have walked through forests now fossilized, traced the scars of glaciers, listened to the whispers of chemistry and the echoes of extinction. We have considered myths and maps, weighed signals both natural and artificial, and asked how civilizations might vanish without leaving ruins. Yet at the end of all this reflection, Antarctica offers us no final answer. It gives us instead a question, quiet, persistent, and humbling. What else might lie hidden beneath the world's last great frontier? Antarctica is a paradox. It is the most explored of the unexplored, a continent we can map but not truly know. From above, satellites trace its outlines in exquisite detail, yet beneath the ice are valleys, mountains, and lakes unseen for millions of years. Its surface tells us little of its depths. It is a library we can only read page by page, drilling narrow cores, deciphering fragments, piecing together a story that will always be incomplete. The evidence we seek may never come. Civilizations, if they ever existed in Antarctica, may have been erased entirely, their traces lost to glaciers and tectonics. Or they may linger faintly in anomalies of carbon and metal, in isotopes and sediments, waiting for us to learn how to read them. Or perhaps the continent has always been silent of human presence, its forests and rivers home only to plants and animals, its ice untouched by the minds of builders. All three possibilities remain, each as humbling as the others. But perhaps the true value of this inquiry does not lie in proof, but in perspective. To imagine forgotten civilizations is to step outside the narrow timeline of written history, to consider our place in the deeper story of Earth. It is to remember that rock is the memory of the planet, that ice is its diary, and that even the absence of evidence can be meaningful. It is to accept that mystery itself has value, that questions, even unanswered, can keep wonder alive. And in that sense, Antarctica is not silent at all. Its very blankness speaks. Its ice whispers of atmospheres long gone. Its rocks remember forests, rivers, and perhaps catastrophes we can scarcely imagine. Its myths and maps, whether accurate or mistaken, remind us of our human longing to peer beyond the horizon. And its silence teaches us humility, that the earth is vast, that our knowledge is partial, and that some stories may never be fully told. So we end not with an answer, but with an invitation. The next time you look at a globe and see the white expanse at the bottom of the world, let it remind you, here lies a frontier, not just of geography, but of imagination. Here lies a land that has been green and will be green again. A land that may still hold secrets in deep freeze. Here lies the question, what if? For in the end, the greatest mysteries are not the ones we solve, but the ones that continue to call us back again and again into wonder. Antarctica is such a mystery, a continent of silence, a continent of memory, a continent of questions. And the last, lingering question it leaves us with is simple and profound. If the ice one day melts, what stories will it tell?